He said, yes, quite right, he said. It's collections taken by Soviet miners to support their English comrades. And if you knew about the pay of Soviet miners, there was no money for them to give to collections. And he used to go regularly to the Soviet embassy, was seen going to the Soviet embassy very regularly, talking to them. And now, there's been published in East Germany, the papers from their government records of talks that Scargill had with them for financial support of his strike.
In the end, it was the miners themselves who voted with their feet gradually to return to work.
Well, once they started going back in one pit, they tried going back in other pits, and it spread. I mean, every day I had the figures for people going back to pits and where they were. And every day you had some new pits, and you had more people going back into the pits that already started to go back. And it built up a very rapid increasing momentum. And Scargill knew when that happened, he was finished.
On the 3rd of March 1985, a year after the strike began, at a special delegates conference, the NUM voted to return to work.
Over the years, the NUM had negotiated better pay and better conditions and had done great work. And they stuck to this great principle of only striking with a ballot. And when that principle was broken, I think it did enormous damage to their union. And they lost their funds, they lost their clout. And I think it did great damage to the union and great damage to the industry. I think they were a great union, and I'm very sorry that man did so much damage to it.
In the end, I had to say to my own people in my own constituency, as well as miners more widely, that they'd been misled, that they had been the subject of falsified figures about coal stocks, that their loyalty was being hideously exploited. And in the wake of the strike, to take the opportunity to explain all this very, very publicly indeed. And it would have been better for the peace of my soul, but certainly for the health of the Labour Party and the standing of the party, if I'd done those things as my instinct told me I should in the early part of 1984.
What Margaret Thatcher proved was that you could take on the National Union of Mine Workers and win. The NUM was regarded with a kind of respect, I think, which didn't really belong to any other industrial union. Suddenly it was sort of made out to have been a paper tiger. It just collapsed. And of course now the NUM barely exists.
The miners' strike was not the only bloody industrial dispute of Mrs. Thatcher's second term in office. The showdown between the print unions, first with Eddie Shah's newspaper group in Warrington and then with Rupert Murdoch's News International at Wapping, gave rise to further riots and violent confrontation. On this occasion, there was no direct involvement by government, but Mrs. Thatcher's new employment legislation had tipped the balance in favour of the proprietors.
Newspaper managements argue that old-fashioned union attitudes have made Fleet Street labour relations a byword for hostility and conflict.
Eddie Shah had caused outrage in 1983 when he decided to introduce new technology and get rid of the old print unions.
We also have what is termed a no-strike clause, which really is pendulum arbitration. And I think the good thing about that is that the electricians realise that you can't always negotiate through conflict, which I think which has been rife in this industry.
It's there that you started to see some of the obduracy that started to mark the negotiating scene in the newspaper industry. There'd always been obduracy there, an adversarial approach, of course, but here you saw something a bit different.
But worse was to come. Rupert Murdoch did approach the unions. He was seeking a deal on flexible working, the end of the closed shop, and a no-strike agreement. He knew, however, that the unions would never agree and had already done a deal with the Maverick Electricians Union, EETPU, to move all his papers from Fleet Street to Wapping.
Murdoch was determined that if he was going to go in Wapping, he'd waited so long, he was going to go in under his terms, and his terms were unacceptable to our people.
On the 24th of January, the workforce went out on strike. Rupert Murdoch sacked them all and within 2 days moved production to Wapping.
In the preparation for the dispute, if he's nothing else, he's thorough. And his lawyers had been obviously asked about the legal implications of such a dispute. And in the discussions it was clear that, well, if they don't go to Wapping you can sack them, these are the grounds and this is how you do it. And all that was put in writing to Murdoch, and we were leaked a copy of that letter. And it was such a cynical demonstration of industrial relations policy and how they were going to operate it that immediately it got a lot of sympathy on our side.
On day 12 of the dispute, Murdoch announced he was going to take the print union Sogat 82 to court for continuing to black distribution of the Times and the Sun.
At Wapping earlier, 6 legal pickets, again almost outnumbered by police, and managing to persuade almost no one to stop.
Well, there's 1 or 2 that's gone away, but the majority of them are going in.
Within the last hour, Mr. Murdoch and his Sun editor showed off their papers, but what about getting them to readers?
We got out nearly the full run of the Sunday Times. The delivery was spotty. We were late in London. We missed about 30% of the retailers in London. Across the country, we got nearly everywhere. We didn't get to Norfolk. We didn't get to part of Southampton. Most places, Sunday Times, absolutely right. The News of the World, we only got 60% out, so there were bigger holes in the News of the World.
It was the trigger for the start of a long and violent confrontation between Murdoch, the print unions and the police. The strike lasted a year, ending in February 1987, with the print unions near bankruptcy and under threat of court proceedings. News International never lost a single night of production. Murdoch had broken the power wielded by the print unions over the newspaper industry.
The union was weakened in many respects. We lost our confidence, and I think that flowed through with the Thatcher years, the Thatcher employment legislation, to the rest of the trade union movement too.
Rupert did actually use all the legal weapons that she had made available. It enabled him to drive a coach and horses through the print unions, who had always been regarded as, you know, the absolute imperial guard of the trade unions. They were, I'm afraid, I have to say, fairly corrupt. They were very much run on a principle of, you know, father's job, son's job, this kind of thing. And they never knew what hit them. And she couldn't have done it without Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch couldn't have done it without her.
The long battles involving the miners and the print unions dealt a severe blow to the union movement from which it would take years to recover. Mrs. Thatcher had succeeded in her early election pledge to curb union power. It had come at a price, but she was victorious. Britain would never be the same.
One does have to say that kind of breaking union power, irresponsible union power in this country, is one of her achievements. And it required, even in the Tory party, a strong Prime Minister to do that, particularly as we could look back and say, well, what happened to Ted Heath when he tried? And the answer was he lost the election and lost his job. So it did require guts and nerve and courage, and all those qualities she certainly had.
In the next programme, the Thatcher brand is unravelled, from the way she walked and talked to her prodigious energy and immaculate coiffure.